Hi guys, I'm going to make an attempt to try to help you through a couple of the assignments that we just assigned on Khan Academy and Quizlet. Some of this stuff is a little older, and so I'm hoping that this quick review will remind you of how this went. So let's start by reminding about costs for the firms. Cost is what it takes for the firm to produce, and what I have listed here for you to look at is actually the average total cost. If you remember, average total cost starts high, it starts to get lower, and then eventually it hits a minimum, and then it starts to go back up. I'm showing you this on the graph to the right because look what happens on the average total cost curve when I actually plot it on the x and y axis. Average total cost goes down, it hits its vertex or minimum, and then it goes back up. It is a parabola. This is always the case. This is average total cost. Now, one of the things that we didn't do in class was marginal cost. We missed out on that, and one of the answers to the video that you're looking at today has to do with marginal cost. So marginal cost is a type of cost that we'll learn about later, but to graph it and then to see what it represents is what we're going to try to do here right now. Marginal cost means one at a time. So the word marginal, marginal, always just means one at a time. And so what that means is it's basically the cost to produce one additional. And so the answer to in the video that we saw was you produce until MC equals MR. And if you remember, we learned that MR is a fancy way of saying price. And so we produce until marginal cost equals price. And so marginal costs means one more, one at a time. So as we produce, 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, we're going to ask ourselves, should we keep producing this, yes or no? So long as it's below the price, the answer is going to be yes. Now on this next slide, we show a basic supply and demand graph. You guys remember this. This, what we did, it can shift, it can change, and so like here's a demand shift if we wanted to do that. You remember the acronym TRIBE to cause this to happen. This causes prices to go up, and then this is where a firm always has to set their price. This is something that we learned a while back. Firms always have to set their price at equilibrium. Forgive my handwriting here, it's kind of hard to write with the stylus. And so firms always have to set their price at equilibrium. Firms do not get to choose the price. So now, when we look back at the previous graph, this graph here is what we call the costs for a firm. And then this graph here is what we call the market. And again, forgive my handwriting there. So that brings us to this last graph, which we call a side-by-side, and which is what we would have learned next in class. Over here, we have the market, and then over here, we have the firm. Notice then, the firm has to produce at equilibrium price. What we're going to do is we're going to make a line across. This represents demand. This is the firm's demand because the firm always has to produce its prices at market price. And so this is demand. And so then what we're going to do next is we're going to, from this graph, we're going to transfer the firm graph over to the last graph, the side-by-side. And so what we see then is we have our marginal cost, which equals supply. That makes this dot right there a very important dot. That is our equilibrium. Now I'm off a little bit because it didn't work perfect there. I'm going to erase that and I'm going to try to fix that. And so we're going to make that dot again. That's a little better. And then here is our equilibrium for the firm. This represents the price and quantity the firm needs to produce at. Remember, demand equals marginal revenue. So we're going to write MR equals D over here. And then we'll call that line Mr. D for a long time. And finally, we have our average total cost, which then just looks like this. And then we have this triple intersect there, and this is what we call long-run equilibrium for a firm. In this instance, then we can see then that when the MC intersects the MR, which is also demand, that's this spot right there, when that all happens, that is equilibrium for this firm, and that's why the answer to the question is MC equals MR. How many units will this firm produce? The answer is at that intersect. This is how many the firm will produce. If this number here were 200, the answer to the question would have been 200. I hope this helps. It was a little fast, I think. I'll try to represent this in another format later.